Hello and welcome to episode 59 of PubShorts, Breaking the Law. My name is Dr. KK. I'm the Innovation Officer at Trinca and Inago, and I have with me Tony 59, a big number. I cannot believe it.
It's not that big. I mean, it can only get bigger. Hi, Kate. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. And how are you doing? And please let the audience know what you do and where they can find us.
So I'm Tony O'Rourke, and I'm VP for partnerships here at Inago, and I look after our engagement and relationships with publishers, with research organisations around the world around editing language services and around the use of responsible AI.
Excellent, excellent. So, Tony, why are we calling this episode Breaking the Law?
Well, that's a very good question. By the way, you've picked a good song. You've actually you're in my wheelhouse here. I'm a big
Yes,
fan of Judas Priest.
I could
Um,
imagine. Yes.
yeah, when I had hair. So it's just around the fact that I think unwittingly, maybe unknowingly, in times, researchers are breaching or breaking the law, breaking some of the rules around research integrity
Yes, yes.
without actually realizing they're doing so.
Right.
I've,
And
I've been very white,
yeah, I think it's your camera has suddenly I think the
overcompensated.
exposure is very high, but that's okay. I mean, is there anything that you can do to improve it?
I'm no, I haven't got no. Unfortunately, not. I've taken the blinds down in this room. I look like I'm about to enter the sun.
So let's work with it. The audio is loud and clear. So let me start with the first story. So Tony, we are talking about one of the first articles. I think the Indian research related article that I have. I think we have talked about it here. So it's from the Indian Journal of Medical Ethics, and it discusses a persistent issue of research misconduct in academia. So the main point of the article is that university systems are heavily focused on research metrics, and we know that. And this is partially what we talked about. I mean, we have been talking about in terms of publish or perish. And there's a trend of buying co-authorship in research papers, apart from many other things. And there are apparently software-generated papers based on keywords. It's just like how you do search engine optimization, Tony. So people are writing research because of keywords which will eventually be found searched for, and their articles be found and cited. And also there's a critique on review systems that rely often on software, reducing human involvement. I mean, I guess it is directly as in non-human involved AI assisted peer review, I suppose. And also comments that metrics like H index have a poor predictive power for serious research. So overall, these are sort of persistent problems in the academia space, and it recommends at the end more human oversight to curb misconduct. So I thought it was a sort of an excellent overview articles regarding the problems. What are your thoughts on it, Tony?
My thoughts are kind of a lot of these issues are not new.
Yeah.
The thing about buying co-authorship in research papers, I've heard that before. It's a shocking thing to think about that somebody can be associated with a paper they've had nothing to do with. Um, obviously the clear one is the use of paper mills to create keyword generated papers
Mm-hmm.
is needs to be clamped down as soon as possible because it's undermining the integrity of research.
Right.
So I think anything that can be done that will help the author to ensure that the paper is an honest reflection of honestly conducted research,
Right.
and the publisher is able to verify that using tools, whether they're using tools such as ours in Argo reports, etc.
Right.
Publishers need to find ways to what's the search? The phrase we use is to determine the truth behind the paper, and buying co-authorship, using paper mills, using keyword generated papers is not the truth.
Right. Apart from paper mills, Tony, we have a problem in terms of researchers using text directly. Like they ask probably generative AI like ChatGPT to generate text, and it
Yeah,
eventually results in hallucinated references. And so the next paper that we are talking about is an archive preprint, and it's an interesting suggestion. So it's titled "Guarding Against Artificial Intelligence Hallucinated Citations: A Case
yeah.
for Full Text Reference Deposit." So basically the author suggests that if a researcher is citing articles, he's expected to have access to it and has access to the full text of the paper. And the author suggests that you submit that just like how you would submit the entire code or the entire methodology, you submit the full text of all the research paper that you have
Yeah.
cited. This would
Yeah.
obviously curb hallucinate references. I thought was a very interesting thought. Technically, if you are able to put things together, like I was just thinking, get FTR, it manages at the back end. If suppose a researcher indeed had institutional access, it provides the full text of the paper
Yeah.
easily made available. So if suppose you could string these data, as in I think the signals together, maybe at least you can confirm that the researchers indeed had access, if not for the entire thing. So
Uh,
your thoughts?
okay, and now I've got my publisher's hat on.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a whole raft of. I mean, I look, I see the principle. I understand the theory of what the author is trying to say. And if this was exclusively a universe where only preprints were being cited, and preprints, are still openly citable, then it wouldn't be an issue. But what the author is talking about potentially, I think, is citing the final version of record of a paper, which tends to be the journal article.
Right.
And those journal articles have copyright. If you're suddenly sharing the full text of an article, you have no right to share because you haven't purchased that right or you haven't obtained that right. You're in breach of copyright. And what kind of message does that give? So I like the idea of providing greater evidence. And let's say we have Inago Read, for example, which allows you to highlight. I think you've talked about this, to highlight related papers
Right.
that will support your research, which then the author or the reviewer, I beg your pardon, can then go on and check
Right.
Him or herself. But I think it's unless it's limited to open access content that's has no copyright restrictions, such as, for example, certain preprint services, then it's a whole copyright landmine they're walking into.
Right, but let me just clarify one thing. I think the proposal is primarily at the time of submission, the an author, let's say
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're sharing it with a third party.
Okay.
That's not within your licensed organization. You're in breach of copyright.
Right.
End of story.
So it's not giving access to the end reader is what I thought. But I see your point as well.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you're giving access to another individual who's not part of your licensing organization, unless you've got permission to share a copyright piece of material. You're in breach.
Excellent
That's
point.
it. I think it's a great idea, but I think there are other ways of providing that solution without necessarily sharing potentially copyright material.
Right. Moving on to the next story. This is slightly different. It's institutional research integrity manipulation. So this is an article published in Chemistry World titled 14 Universities May Have Manipulated Institutional Rankings. So the analysis shows a massive increase in publications at some universities, and 14 universities show a decline in first authorship rates. And there are concerns about unethical practices like gifting authorship, and rankings could be incentivizing unethical behavior in academia. We sort of briefly touched on this with vis-a-vis the first article. So interesting thought again. I mean, we know about institutional rankings manipulation. I see a big full page ad in Times of India this morning about one university just basically claiming that it is the highest rated in terms of university rankings in India. So it's a prestigious thing, but nobody should really manipulate things, and there needs to be a means to at least identify if there are like authorship related or citation related manipulation that is happening. So what are your thoughts, Tony?
I think again, this is something which significantly impacts on the integrity of the research communication process.
Right.
Doing things like gift authorship. The number of times I've heard experienced, established researchers say, "Look, I've been included in the author list of a paper. I'm not even part of the program. I've got no idea how my name got included." How on earth do you stop that? How can you curb that? So anything that incentivizes unethical behavior like this in academia needs to be policed in some way. I'm not quite sure what the solution is. I know we have tools that will help to determine, will help to disambiguate authors, but it won't necessarily tell you whether the author actually had anything to do with the paper.
Right.
That's something else that needs to be explored.
So this article mentions sophisticated tools, etc., but some of the other measures recommended are reducing the incentives for ranking manipulation and improving assessment methods. So now if you decrease, if you put less emphasis on the things that are leading to research integrity for authors, research integrity issues for authors and institutions? Maybe. So, as a systemic, you mentioned it that these problems have been there for quite a long time, but maybe it's time for us to figure out ways
Well,
apart from solving the actual problem
yeah.
with
I mean,
software as well.
maybe the issue goes beyond just these simple metrics, these simple tools, and perhaps there is a flaw within the system
Right.
that's putting so much emphasis still on on publication,
Right.
uh, and the number of papers you publish, and where you're published, and how often you're cited, and who you're being cited by. Yeah, there's surely there has to be other ways of being able to manage the visibility and the importance of good research.
Right, Tony. So we are moving on to, I think, the first of three articles from Scholarly Kitchen that we are covering in this episode. And the first one, I think you recommended that we cover this.
Yeah.
It is the new STM. It's titled, the article is titled New STM 2029 Trends Report Provides a Bridge to the Future. So let me, before I'll open this bridge that we're talking about. Have you taken a look at this? It's a quite wonderful graphic, but let me just talk about the article itself. So this uses obviously a bridge as a metaphor to symbolize collaboration across the scholarly community. It focuses on the need for integration rather than just technological innovation. We have talked about it. Infrastructure and collaboration between different institutions and organizations are very important. And it highlights existing initiatives like COPE and Crossref, which we have talked about in many episodes. And challenges such as misinformation and geopolitical tensions are visually depicted. So now let's take a look at the visual depiction. This is the bridge that they're talking about, and there are, if you it's a fun thing. If you zoom in, you'll understand a lot of different things. There are mentions to AI and robots. You can see a robot reading. Wait, let me just see if I can scroll. Yeah, you see a little robot that is sending out a signal, and there is a robot on this side. Where is it? I
I
cannot
think
find it. I think I've zoomed
just
out a little.
go right.
Yeah,
It's
there
there.
there you go.
Is it?
And there are different stakeholders, which I think, yeah, researcher, funder, publisher, librarian, everybody seems to have what it seems like a float. I'm not sure what this is. And interesting things are happening at the top as well. So this is the overall sort of the image that we're talking about. The metaphor is that bridge. Everybody should come together. So let me go back to the article and ask you, what are your thoughts on this article when you first read
Oh
it?
no, two things I want to say about
Yeah.
this article, and the reason I flagged it is because I think that if you're not working in publishing, but you want to understand what the publishing industry thinks the future looks like, I think the STM, I can't remember what the organisation is called, it's Future Watch, but whoever builds these future trends reports do a fabulous job in kind of summarising their view of what, or the publishing industry's view of what the short-term future looks like. I think they produce these Future Watch things either every 2 years or every 4 years, and they're always fascinating. They're always interesting, and you know what? And if you look back, they're always accurate.
Right.
So if you don't know it and you're interested in terms of how the publishing industry thinks it's going to progress over the next in the short term, absolutely urge you to look at these reports, and the link we can share afterwards. But they are what they're talking about. If you look at the detail, is absolutely right. If you think of some of the biggest, most important collaborations, most important things that have happened that have benefited the publishing industry, the research publishing industry in the last 20, 25 years, have been as a result of collaborations.
Right.
Crossref is a really good example.
Right.
Crossref, and I think I mentioned this before, happened because individual publishers were going out trying to create linking arrangements of individual with other publishers so they could share each other's content in the references.
Right.
Crossref just allowed a repository to do that automatically, that you just had to share and be part of and pay for.
Right.
And COPE is exactly the same. COPE is the Committee on Publication Ethics. Again, another industry collaboration, and really sets the standard, I think, the gold standard for how publishers are working together to collaborate for the benefit of the research communication process.
Right. A quick thing. Obviously, they're using a big crane, and the counterweight is PID, the personal identifying. Yeah, and the last stone that they're laying on the bridge is balanced by it, and the river is full of sharks, including all sorts of negative actors.
One of those sharks is a paper mill. Another one of those sharks hallucination. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, wonderful. So please, again, we'll drop the links in the YouTube description anyway, so you can go check out these articles yourself. So moving on to the next article, which is from Nature. It's a comment in Nature. It is titled "Why an Over Reliance on AI-Driven Modeling is Bad for Science." So this is related to research integrity, even though it is an AI-related article. So many scientific papers are now using AI, but often without clear error checking protocols. So the argument is that if because there is so many, let's say, AI generated content already in the in published research, it's probably, it's not a good idea to train AI itself, because it is being fed incorrect or erroneous things. And machine learning models can be powerful, but they can also pose a significant risk. And AI use in fields like COVID and everything, which have been proven to be partially successful, not fully successful. There's a lot to be desired in terms of accuracy, at least. So eventually, what the article argues for is that there is a risk of AI creating this illusion of progress without actually causing real scientific advancements. Interesting thoughts in mentioned in the article. I mean, we've been talking about the use of AI across research workflows for researchers and institutions and publishers, and we've insisted, at least at this point in 2025, middle of 2025, that you need human oversight, because AI
yeah.
is not completely reliable, right, Tony?
Absolutely. Kind of my concern here is that how, with AI creating content, that the literature that's being generated almost become works of fiction rather than works of actual evidentiary research.
Right.
So again, it really highlights the importance of human guardrails. That you're using AI sensibly to perform aspects of the peer review process, for example, but you're also involving experts in this field, to ensure that those findings are reflective of the science and are correct.
Right, right. Okay. So the next two articles are from Scholarly Kitchen. It is part 1 and 2 of the series, Misinformation, Disinformation, and Scholarly Communication by Rick
Yeah,
Anderson. So first of all, I did not think about it until I read the article. Misinformation is false information, as per the article, whereas disinformation is deliberately misleading information. So you
yeah,
are causing there's a causality to it, or intent to it.
yeah,
This distinction is important, and it's tricky to identify. So truth is crucial in battling misinformation, yet defining truth itself is complex. And Anderson talks about libraries and publishers, having different strategies. Libraries provide access to all information without sort of parsing whether it's truth or not, but publishers, in terms of journal publishers, filter for the truth, right? Because they have peer review and everything.
yeah,
So, he argues in this first part, he argues that critical thinking is essential but challenging, often leading to uncomfortable truth, and disinformation is inherently weaponized, usually spread with harmful intent. So, interesting thought. I'll ask for your thought before I proceed to the part 2 of this series. Please, Tony, what do you
uh,
think?
the only reading Rick's a very trusted consultant in this space.
Mm.
I've got a lot of time for him. um, Again, it highlights the importance of human oversight in this. The one thing I was thinking about, the distinction between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation can be an honest mistake,
Mm-hmm.
that someone's made a piece of research that should be picked up in peer review. Disinformation, I think, sometimes might be harder to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody is found to be generating disinformation, then there should be immediate grounds for retraction,
Right.
and worse, in terms of if an institution is shown to be responsible for publishing papers with consistent disinformation in there, then a plug needs to be pulled somewhere.
So interesting question, because you've been involved with libraries. So this difference between libraries, as libraries hold all sorts of information without parsing, as in without having a filter. Do you think that libraries should have a filter, or should
No,
that?
no, I don't think that libraries should have a filter. I think it's ultimately the responsibility
Okay.
of the researcher to pick the most appropriate material to support their research.
Mm-hmm.
I think as soon as libraries start having filters, you're getting into all sorts of social and political problems
Mm.
that I don't think anyone wants to get into.
So then
Um,
that.
but I mean, that said, does the library have a role in communicating
Mm.
bad research? Yes, it does. I think if it highlights, for example, retracted papers or um, um, papers that have been generated by AI.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is also, I mean, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in the US, and this one of the things we were talking about was the search for truth. You know, is it the role of the library to provide sort of a verification service for the research that's coming out of their institution? I think most librarians at the time are thinking, well, we have a role in terms of providing supporting evidence.
Right.
Maybe this is something we need to do. I don't know how much you know about the DocuMark product that we've been working on.
I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
So DocuMark is a service that we're bringing out. We brought out, which allows the library or the researcher or the research manager or the head of department, whoever it might be, to identify the source of truth. You know, how much of that paper has been generated by peer review, how much of that paper has actually been typed in by hand, how much of it's been cut and pasted from another source.
Yeah.
You know, to try and isolate, you know, what that source of truth is.
Yeah, I think.
And I think there is the role of the library is going to change to reflect that.
Yeah, I think you mentioned as in the three sort of ways in which content can be categorized by DocuMark. The first one, I think you were intending that it is written by humans, as opposed, you mentioned generated by peer review. I think you mentioned generated by AI, right? That's probably what you
I
meant.
beg your pardon, generated by AI. I'm so sorry. Yes.
Right. So quick question as a follow up. So if you think that libraries have not much of a role in terms of let the researcher figure out whether it's misinformation, disinformation, etc., then why should publishers and journals care for this as much? As in, why?
I don't think the library should have no responsibility, but I think libraries maybe should have a role in terms of identifying or communicating when they find out, and whatever that means might be, if research that's available within their organization has been potentially retracted.
Right.
You know, I don't know how they might do that, but there is you might want to sort of point out to the researcher before they cite the paper that they found within the library somehow that this paper's been retracted. And if they're working with organizations like us or with publishers who are serious about identifying bad content or bad actors, then they should be sharing that information with their researchers. So I think I don't think it should restrict their collection practices, but I do think it should inform their communication processes with their researchers.
Excellent. I mean, excellent segue as well, because in part 2, Rick also talks about the researcher's responsibility or the scholar's responsibility in terms of identifying misinformation and disinformation.
Yeah.
And there's a call for scholars to cite or provide solid evidence whenever they are citing, and they must obviously, they in the act of pursuing the truth, they must balance moral reasoning and scientific evidence, and truth matters, and scholars have only a duty to distinguish it from falsehood. So there is an element of morality as well, and I think we discussed pretty much everything related to libraries versus publishers and disinformation and misinformation. So Tony, I mean, you already mentioned DocuMark. The other thing that I can think of is that I think for helping journals and publishers to weed out the truth from the non-truth is what peer review is for. And there is a crisis in peer review. There's a lot more volume than the reviewers can manage, and that's why we are advocating for AI assisted peer review with full human oversight. I guess you would agree to that.
I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. Okay. So next we have an interesting paper. This took me a while to understand what this means, but the title is "Chemistry Journals Take Just Under 3 Years to Retract Papers with Self-Plagiarism." So we are talking about papers that have only self-plagiarism, as in it's not about all kinds of plagiarism.
It's just one aspect.
Yeah, one aspect of plagiarism, yes. So chemistry journals retract papers with self-plagiarism in under 3 years. For comparison, biological science journals take about 3.8 years, and math and physics journals average 1.8 years. That's an interesting thing, and this study examined over, I think, approximately 6,000 papers retracted for self-plagiarism between 2001 and 2022, and chemistry journals had approximately 1,340 such retraction. There are some challenges that are mentioned. Self-plagiarism is more difficult to detect than conventional plagiarism, because I do not think that I don't know if Authenticate and other providers identify self-plagiarism separately from general plagiarism. I don't think so. It does that. Yeah.
No, I don't think they do.
Yeah, and apart from that, the article mentions that the current US definitions do not classify self-plagiarism as research misconduct, but there's an argument that it should be to prevent wasted time redundant material. So, I mean, I think that any plagiarism is plagiarism. If it is indeed plagiarism, if you're not citing, if you're not providing the reason why you are using the copy text verbatim without, providing, etc. Your thoughts?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, isn't it? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've worked, as you know, I've mentioned this a number of times. I've worked within the physical sciences and in healthcare sciences, and there's a difference in behaviour um, by research in terms of how often they should cite themselves, or how often they should, how often their own papers are cited. Look, at the end of the day, these researchers are experts and the top in their field, and they might think they're the best person to cite
Mm-hmm.
for future research. And and it may be the valid, most relevant paper to show sort of the progress of research to cite a previous paper that you've published or had published. However, what we used to look at the sort of geographic differences in self-citation. So, for example, I haven't got the evidence to show this now, but we used to identify in physics, for example, there was a US researcher was more likely to cite themselves than, say, a European researcher or a Japanese researcher, for
Right.
example. So there was differences in behaviour, but it didn't necessarily mean to say that the paper was wrong
Right.
or that the paper was bad. It just it was a behaviour.
Right.
It was a pattern.
Right.
So the question here is self-plagiarism. It's really difficult because if it's valid research, um, does it matter if you're the author of the paper that supports their research or somebody else? One of the things we want to be able to do is within our reporting tool, in our reports, for example, is to give the publisher the option of identifying, look, how many times has an author cited themselves? It's not just the age of the reference,
Right.
whether the paper's retracted. Are 30% of the references by the same author?
Mm-hmm.
Does that breach any rules that the
Right.
publisher might have?
Right. Right.
So,
So one thing I think you probably are talking about self citation more than self plagiarism in this
well,
case.
I am, but I mean, it's self citation with the detail, isn't it? You're citing yourself, and the evidence of the citation is what you quote in the text.
Right. So, if suppose you are, let's say, legally or ethically permissible non-salami slicing multi-part research, then you could technically copy the methodology of your research paper, the first research paper, and sort of copy verbatim. And plagiarism by default is that you are copying and not attributing. The second part is also important. So, if
Okay,
suppose
yeah,
from that point of view, the ideal recommended thing would be that once you have methodology cited which is relevant for future research, you cite the methodology in the first paper instead of providing the text itself. So I think the this article talks about when, let's say, Tony is publishing his second, third, and fourth papers on the same sort of series of research or in front of the same research project. Tony is copy pasting text from the previous article without citing, which is what I think is a ethical issue here.
and that's what differentiates these super journals, these really high impact
Yeah.
journals. I won't mention names
Yeah.
From a lot of other journals, and that what those very high impact, very prestigious journals want, and what they do not want at all, those salami sliced.
Right.
We've done a piece of research. Here's paper one, which is a methodology. Here's paper two, which is a theory. Here's paper three, which is the experiment.
Right.
Here's paper four, which is conclusions. What they want is a single thought through paper that will then describe the entire process and the outcomes, and that's what distinguishes. And that's part of the reason why there's been such a huge growth in research output over the last few years, is because of this salami slicing.
Yeah, and if for anybody who's in the audience who's interested in exploring the research integrity tools that we offer as part of our Inago reports, please check the Trinka.ai website and find the details about all the Inago reports. Tony, anything you want to add to that?
I've said my piece.
Okay, cool. So the last major sort of story, non-quick hit, is a news story from Nature titled "Journal Targeted by Paper Mills Still Grappling with the Aftermath Years Later." So it's an interesting story. I'm not mentioning the name of the journal, but it was heavily targeted by the paper mills. Now, a 2023 analysis found 226 studies with manipulated images, a hallmark of paper mill submissions. And the publisher is Taylor and Francis was investigating, but they are put in strict strict measures in terms of screening the papers to ensure that there are no signs of paper mills, etc. This has led to a decrease in submissions and eventually publications. So it's a natural sort of a consequence of stricter measures. It's an interesting thought. Should a few bad actors cause problems for a lot of researchers in the future in terms of making things difficult in terms of submission and eventually
What was that?
publication?
Should or do? They do. This is what's happening.
Yeah.
A small number of papers have not played by the rules and have impacted on a particular journal, which has therefore impacted on the opinion of that for that journal elsewhere in the community, and therefore the submissions that go to it.
Right.
It's unfortunate reality, and publishers, it's every response. Publishers need to demonstrate that they have all, and they are doing some superb things, but they need to demonstrate in practice what they're doing to manage the integrity of the submission process.
All right. Are you ready for the quick hits, Tony?
Go for it.
The first one is US Copyright Office issues a highly anticipated report on copyrightability of AI generated work. So I'll just summarize. This report underscores the necessity of human authorship for copyright protection in the US and explores various global perspectives. And I think you have a global perspective from the UK. So the report outlines scenarios where AI generated works might still receive protection. Assistive AI uses where AI aids rather than replaces human creativity can be eligible. Works with expressive outputs that reflect human creativity may qualify and as can original arrangements of AI content. So this is an interesting article. So I believe you've got some perspective from the UK in this context.
Well, no, it's just something that's been in the press quite a lot recently. Is that the UK is consulting on changes to copyright law regarding the use of copyright materials for training AI models. Right. They want to balance the interest of developers and copyright holders. They seem to be taking a slightly more relaxed view about the use of copyright, making certain restrictions not necessarily apply to AI. I have a concern how this is going to impact on the UK creative industries, for example.
Right. And the last quick hit, so Springer Nature has released another research integrity tool. So it's adding to Geppetto and I forget Snapshot, which are related.
Geppetto.
Yeah, Geppetto. So this one, the new one, apparently checks for the verification of citations, which is a common thing as a usual trend. We ourselves are working on such a product. So overall, a good sign in the sense that more and more research integrity flags are being detected by AI-based tools. Any thoughts, Tony, on this?
No. Well, two things. First of all, I'm always a big fan of the use of Disney characters to name products. Geppetto being the father of Pinocchio.
Yeah.
Let's not forget. But also, seriously, it's the publishers like Springer Nature are seriously investing, as other publishers are, in AI-based tools to support the research integrity process in their workflow, and which is only going to help the researcher. It's only going to help the reputation of the publications they're producing.
Excellent. So that brings us to the end of our episode. Tony, any Judas Priest concert references that you would like to talk about before we wind up?
No. I mean, somebody asked me recently what the loudest concert was I ever attended. And in 2004, 2005, I think it was, again, when I had hair, I went to a Judas Priest gig with a band called Scorpions, a German heavy hard rock band. And it was the loudest. It was like listening to an aircraft landing permanently in my ears. I was deaf for about 4 days after that concert. It was unbelievable. They have a song called Painkiller, which is exactly the opposite of what it was. Painkiller. It was a brilliant concert, like great fun, but
excellent. I think some of the members of our audience has already requested photographic evidence of you having long hair, but we will we'll give them that later.
You're not going to get it.
But if they want to find more about what we talk about in the previous 58 episodes of PubShorts, or if they want to know, what your, let's say, thoughts after the recent conferences and industry events that you attended, how can they find all of that?
Well, both KK and I are available on LinkedIn. Please find us there. If you want to find out more about, want to see some of the previous episodes on PubShorts, you can go to the Inago channel on YouTube, and there's a playlist of all 58 of the previous episodes, and soon this one.
Yeah.
So I'd encourage you to press the like button and share the video with your colleagues. and enjoy the 58 previous episodes that we've discussed. And if you've got any ideas for topics, if you'd like us to talk about anything in particular, feel free to drop by the KK or me a line. You can contact me at tonyo@inago.com.
Yeah, we are always grateful for your viewership and your feedback.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So, with that, I think we can bring this episode to an end. And until the next time, this is Dr. KK signing off on behalf of Tony as well as the rest of the team that helps us bring such content. We'll see you in the next one. Bye, Tony.
See you in the next one.